Okay, guys, welcome to today. We're dealing with Parshat VaYakel and Pekudei. It's a double portion. And I'm really glad to see you all. So now we're on camera for this Parsha. Okay, it's really exciting, and I don't know, what can I tell you? Every Parsha really is. But this is actually something very unique that I really love, because I think you know that Yiboneh, we talk about unity, unity, and trying to create a unity. And so the verse says that Moses gathered everyone together. In the English it says he assembled. In the Hebrew it says VaYakel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Israel. And he said to them, these are the things which Hashem commanded to do them. Okay, we're going to discuss that much later in the class. But what is this gathering? When did it take place? So if you have the source sheets, you can see Rashi on this verse. This is in Exodus chapter 35, verse 1. That Moses called and he wanted to assemble everyone together. So the word VaYakel, right, he assembled them when? On the day after Yom Kippur, when he came down from the mountains. Okay, so the reason this is going to be a little bit problematic is because if you look back in chapter 18, this is number 2 on your source sheet, I believe. Chapter 18, verse 13. This is in Parshas Yisro. And in Parshas Yisro, we all know that Jethro came up with this fantastic idea. This is Moses' father-in-law. Might have been concerned about the time that his own son-in-law spent with his daughter, but he saw that Moses was sitting around all day judging the people, and he thought this is not the way to go. And he came up with this brilliant suggestion of a hierarchy of a court system, so that Moses would only take the most difficult cases, and the lower court systems can deal with the either easier cases. So what does Rashi say on that verse? Rashi says it was on the day after Yom Kippur. Okay, come on now. Chapter 18 and chapter 35, it's the same day. Moses is sitting and judging the people in Parshas Yisro, and his father-in-law says, something's got to give. Let's create a system that works. Rashi tells us that was on the day after Yom Kippur. Our Parsha, we're in the middle of already the Mishkan, discussing all these ideas of the Mishkan. Smack in the middle, we're dealing with the same day when Moses gathers everyone together. So yeah, I'm going to try to describe to you why this is the same day, and you're going to be amazed. It's not me, it's the Torah. First of all, the Torah is not in order. Okay, now we know that. Everyone knows it's not in order. How do we know? Because there's different dates. You go through it chronologically and you find that there's different dates. So we have a major argument amongst Rashi and the Ramban that hold that, yes, they both agree that the Torah is not in order, but that's only where the dates show you that it's not in order. Rashi holds it's never in order even when there's no dates mentioned. Ramban holds it's in order except when dates are mentioned. But look at here. We have many, many parshiot, many chapters, and it's the same day? How can that be? So, let me give you a timeline. What are we dealing with here? If it's the day after Yom Kippur, and I want you to write this down, we left on the 15th of Nisan. 50 days later, we stand out Mount Sinai for the revelation. We call that Shavuot. Some people call it Pentecost. So that was 50 days after we left Egypt. Let's just use the 6th of Sivan as a marker. And 40 days later, Moses is supposed to come down with the first set of tablets, or at least the only set of tablets we were going to have. But unfortunately, on that 17th day of Tammuz, which is 40 days after Shavuos, we were involved with the golden calf. So Moses breaks the tablets. Gone. For the next 40 days, he's involved 24/7 praying for our souls, that we should be saved and forgiven, even though God says, I'm going to start over with you, and Moses says, no, wipe me out of the book, please keep them around. Nobody will believe in you anymore. You won't be taken seriously. What a desecration of everything you've accomplished up until now. Stay with the Jewish people. And on the 40th day was the first of Elul. God says, I forgive them. Come up to receive the second set. And that day, 40 days later, is the 10th of Tishrei. The 10th of Tishrei, Moses comes down with the second set of tablets. And that day is Yom Kippur. So now we arrived at Yom Kippur. Did Moses have any time to sit and judge anything? No. So Parshas Yisro, when Jethro sees Moses sitting all day long from morning until evening, as the verse says, not here, but actually in chapter 18, verse 13. It came about on the next day that Moses sat down to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from the morning until the evening. But also look, it says the next day. It was the next day. That's L'macharat Yom Kippurim. And our day, when Moses is doing what? He's going to tell them about Shabbos. See, verse 2. And then verse 4, he's telling them about the Truma. Look at verse 5. Take from yourselves a portion for Hashem. Everyone whose heart motivates him, he shall bring it. And then these are the what? Remember we talked about a half a shekel for the foundation, what are they called? The sockets, the adanim. And the other half a shekel for the communal offerings. And the third of the 3 trumos were for the free will offering, which were the 13 different ingredients, which our verse then discusses. So we're talking about a free will offering here. Now, so I'm going to go back into the Kli Yakar, and he points this out right away. You have our verse, which is the day after Yom Kippur, in Parshas Yisro, where it says, V'hi ma'macharat v'yeshe Moshe lishpot et ha'am. It was the following day, and Moses sat to judge the people. And Rashi says there that it's the day after Yom Kippur. So the Kli Yakar wants to explain that this is well known that Moses gathered everyone together at this point in our Parsha to inform them of the command, the mitzvah, to make the donations and to build, to construct the Mishkan through their contributions, through the Nedavot. Now, what was Moses concerned? What do you think Moses was concerned? Like, he's it, man. He's like the head prophet, the head sage. You know, what's he worried about? He's worried that maybe somebody would make a donation to the building of this house of God that unites all of us with something stolen, something that doesn't belong to him. Think about it a second. And what would happen? Why would someone deliver something stolen? The truth is, he didn't actually steal it. He just thought it was his, right? Don't we sometimes pick the articles up and then you come home from the store and you realize, I took someone else's bag. Well, it's a big mitzvah to return it, right? It's called thievery. If you decide you're going to keep it, it's thievery. So what happened was when we left Egypt, so on the 9th plague, we got to see where the Egyptians hid their gold. And then the night before we left, we went and actually borrowed from them. And we were able to tell them, you're lying to us. We know exactly where it is. And that was only a small portion of all the gold that we took out of Egypt. Remember, God promised Abraham, when you go, you're going to come out with a great wealth. That would have been a lot of things to carry. So God did a real kindness and a chesed. Have you heard this? Wait till you hear this. Hashem loves us. So, the Egyptians had many gods. Now, it does say in the Torah that the Egyptians that feared God, some believed in God, they hid their animals during the plague of pestilence. So when we were by the sea, it says 3 days after we didn't return, Pharaoh sent chariots with horses. So how'd they get the horses? These are the horses of the survivors of the Egyptian pestilence. And they brought with them gold. In other words, where the Jews lived, they asked their neighbors for their gold. But Egypt's a big country. Today it's 80 million people. It's not just by the Nile, it's the whole country. So all these horses came from the people that had they had a healthy fear of God. But the Gemara tells us that even the best of the non-Jews, the best of the idol worshippers, are not worth a whole lot. Okay, I don't know exactly say the phrase, but that even these people, they came out to kill us. Okay, we have to watch our backs, even from the best of the non-Jews. So this is, I have a phrase that says, paranoid Jews live longer. Have you ever heard that one? Anyway, so you can imagine why. Even the best of the Egyptians came out to kill us, but God created a miracle. Even though he killed and smashed and wiped out all the idols in Egypt, he left one behind. So when we get to the splitting of the sea, it mentions in the verse, Pi Cherot, there's certain idols that still exist. This idol is the idol of wealth and gold, and so they thought that if they brought their idols of gold, that idol still existed. So God tricked them. This one, we're holding on, make you believe that that's one still has power because he's not totally destroyed. So the Egyptians sent all their gold with their warriors in hopes that their God could still overcome the Jews. So when the Egyptians get drowned in the sea, Hashem caused all the gold to come up on the seashore. So we walked for 7 days without having to carry all that weight. You hear the Chesed? You think we complained while we were in the desert? We would have complained that whole week. So one less week of complaint. Okay. Isn't Hashem great? Anyway. So when people were taking the gold off the shore, if two people grabbed it at the same time, it's whoever grabbed first it belongs to. That's how an acquisition is made. Whoever grabs first. So if two people bent over, but whatever, maybe they didn't see the other person, they thought they grabbed it first, and the other person thought he grabbed it first. He's not a thief, he's not in Hebrew, a gazlan, he's not like a thug. He actually believes that he acquired it first. The other guy thought he acquired it first. So these two people are a little fighting over a certain piece of wealth or material. So this has to be resolved before it's going to be contributed and donated to the temple of God, which is the great and holy house of God that brings peace between people. How can it be built upon animosity between people? So these things have to be resolved before the donations can come in. Isn't that beautiful? So now we're going to see it inside. Don't take my word for it. So he said, there's a verse in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes, that's 3:16, just to give you an idea how bad it would be. King Solomon saw how bad it is. He said, and moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of justice there is wickedness, and the place of righteousness there is wickedness. It can't be. It's not supposed to be. You cannot have in the place of mishpat, of righteousness, or in a place of justice, you cannot have evil. It's not supposed to be built upon evil. So these disputes need to be resolved before the contributions are made. That's why it says, the Kliyakar says, Al Kain Hichriz Moshe Techila. So Moses makes this announcement first. And what does he say? Anybody that owns anything, Mi Bal Devarim, Yigash Alai Mishpat, come to me for judgment. And in this way, that the whole people can come to a place of real peace amongst themselves. So, and he would be able to tell people what belongs to you and what doesn't belong to you through a judgment amongst them. And then, only then would he then tell them, now you have to make the contributions. And look in 35:5, right, as I mentioned before, it says, take from yourselves, me'itcham. What does me'itcham mean? Literally, from yourselves, meaning lo shel chaverim. From yours, mishel echem, lo mishel chaverim. You have to take from what belongs to you, not what belongs to someone else. Are you guys with me? Okay. You have to bring what belongs to you. So the word nitchem seems totally superfluous. Then he says, this is the Cleocar's idea that, it's pretty impossible for one person to judge 600,000 people in one day. So it must take it a few days. And not only that, even if you want to say it took one day, how can any one person judge? As the verse says, look at the verse, it says, actually it's not in this verse, but it was in the earlier verse we said in chapter 18:13. It says, Moses judged, V'yamod ha'am, the people stood al Moshe, min ha'boker ad ha'erev, from the morning until night. Now what does that sound like? Okay, I'll give you a hint. Something to do with creation. Right? Every day it says, right? I have it here. V'hi erev v'voker, right? V'hi erev v'voker. There was evening and there was morning. But here it says from evening, mi'erev ad boker. So it's the opposite. So what do we learn? Wait till you hear this. This is fantastic. Unbelievable. It makes you want to be a judge. Rashi says, and he quotes a Gemara that says like this, that any judge who sits in judgment with the goal of trying to reach the truth, his goal is to arrive at the ultimate truth, then he's made like a partner with God in the creation of the world. As it says in the creation, V'hi erev v'hi voker. It was evening and it was morning. God judges at night, and we judge during the day. When we're not judging during the day, God will step in. We don't want that. Trust me. He allows us, and we're partners. The whole point is that we're partners. Can you imagine this? What a chutzpah? Is that a chutzpah? You know what chutzpah is, right? Mayor? It's a chutzpah to tell us that we're partners with God? Yes. We are partnering with God as long as the judge is sitting there. Remember, what's a judge called in Hebrew? Elohim. Elohim. Did you know that? And what's God called? The same word. We are actually partners with God, and He allows us. He wants us. He demands it of us. And that's why one of the 7 Noachai laws is to set up a system of justice. Justice on this earth, on this planet, on this sphere, in this universe is so important, and we are partners with God. Remember, we talk about the idea that you have a Sanhedrin, whatever they say you have to do, God would change the universe. If they say that the new moon is a certain day, guess what happens? The new moon is the day they say. God rearranges the constellations in the whole world based on what, not man, not what you and me say, but what the congregation, or in this case, we're talking about any judge who's trying to reach the absolute truth. And what's the absolute truth? God Himself. Who's trying to reach the absolute truth is actually a partner with God. As we said, Moses sat from morning until evening. God says, V'hi erev v'hi voker. There was evening and then there was morning each day. And then he wants to say, first of all, if that's not true, meaning that Moses really didn't have time to judge them, so when would he ever have informed them of the Mishkan? That's why I went through with you the time period from the time of leaving Egypt until the day after Yom Kippur. He had no time. He was quite busy. Guess what? There's no way that all the Jews could have brought all those, the half shekels 2 times over and all the ingredients to build the Mishkan in just one day either. This is what Moses was trying to get across during that time period. Remember, it took a few days for them to get all the stuff together. During that time, if anybody has a dispute over any of the items that I mentioned, that wants to, or any items that you have in your possession, that you'd like to donate, before you do that, come forward and you will be judged, or the item will be judged. Let's see if there's any witnesses. Let's see if you can remember what happened. And come to a conclusion, because there's no way that this great and holy house of God can be built on, we'll call it stolen items, or items that don't belong to you. Okay, any questions at this point? Okay, we'll continue. Outside harem is no more. In a hinting way, there is to say that this gathering was for what purpose? Litave hashalom beineim, in order to mediate peace. God wanted Moses to mediate peace. Because you know why? Ein adam dar im nachash kfifa achas. A man cannot live with a snake. You can't live in the same house. I see some of the faces, some of the smiles. There's no way you're going to live with it, let alone a mouse. A snake? Maybe the snake will come and eat the mouse. But anyway, we didn't mean it like a snake, like a really dangerous character in your house. So after the fact that Moses wanted to, or God wanted to inform them of the construction of the Mishkan, and what is it about this Mishkan? The Mishkan will be a place where everybody is a partner. The only thing I can come up with is, besides like a commune, you know, we have a whole house and everyone put in the same amount of money and has the same amount of rights. But let's take another example. If you have a timeshare, so you have 52 partners every week, it's someone else's turn. So you all share the responsibility and of course the pleasure. So this is the house of God that every single one of us who can make the contribution is a part of. We're actually partners with each other in this house. So it's as if we're actually living together in the same house. Even if we're not physically living in the temple, but because we all contributed to it, it's as if we are, I'll read the words because it's so beautiful, Dome ki'ilu hoshiv et kulam b'madur echad. As if we're all dwelling together. Therefore, Moses needs to gather them all together first so that we would really feel the bond of being a single unity of a people. And that's why Rashi says this is what day? The day after Yom Kippur. Why? Let me ask you something. You guys experienced Yom Kippur? You're like an angel. You don't need to eat. You don't need to drink. You don't need any of the other physical things. You know, you don't need leather shoes. And you're like an angel, and you're on this high. You can just, every time you breathe atonement. You breathe forgiveness and love from God. You're wearing white. You really feel like an angel, like you don't even have a body. That's how you feel. So he says, whenever we were encamped in the desert, every time we encamped in the desert, it's always says in Hebrew, VaYachanu, VaYachanu, they encamped, meaning they encamped, which means, what's they? It's a lot of individuals. But when we stood at Mount Sinai, the first time, on Shavuos, a few days before, it says, V'chan Sham Yisrael. It, he, Israel stood, singular. And we were still there. This day after Yom Kippur, it's still there. It's still that time of a certain unification. So I'll just read the words again. Lefisha kol hachaniyot hayu machloches v'taromes. All the other stations and encampments in the desert, there were always arguments and complaints, except for chutz min hachaniyah shekol VaYakel. As it says, if you want to look, in chapter 19, verse 2, that's number 6 on the sheet. Okay, they journeyed from Rephidim, they arrived in the desert of Sinai, they encamped in the desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. In Hebrew it says, V'yichan Sham Yisrael. V'yichan, not V'yichanu, V'yichan. Therefore, Eich Hashem la'akilim b'zman she'en mechukim ve'ein datim shavim. How else are you ever able to gather them together if they didn't have one mind, and if they were ever arguing and they didn't have the same mind? It would be impossible. If everyone was going in their own way, in their own direction, it never would have worked. So which time do you think would be most proper? The Ezezman Muchan Lezeh. which time would be most prepared and proper that Moshe could find to gather them together. Guess what it says? It's the day after Yom Kippur. Well, that feeling is still there. And why? Because Yom Kippur is the day that is Shalom is Mitavek Beneim, that peace and love is mediated amongst us. Do you know what happens in the Jewish community? Comes Elul, 40 days before Yom Kippur. People already get in the mood. But really right before Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, people are already asking forgiveness. And then you have the 10 days of Tshuva. And then Erev Yom Kippur, whoever you missed on your list, you'll go out of your way. And everyone's asking each other for forgiveness. And they're telling them how much they love each other. And how I feel so bad about how I treated you, or what I did to you, whatever it is. So then Yom Kippur itself, so the feeling is still there. He's going to claim that if Moses would have waited a few more days, he uses a very poetic language, that the package would have unraveled. In other words, we were bound up. That is, it's like symbolic of being bound up together as one. And had it not been that day, but a few days later, and I'll read it because it's so beautiful. Im yomo yomayim yamod, but if a few days would have passed, I skipped a line. So I'll go back where he says, because the Yom Kippur itself creates that bond of mediation between them. The actual essence of the day is they are created as a Guda Achas, one unit. That's why it was so easy to gather them together the following day. The whole time that the peace of the previous day was still there, then it's easy. But if a few days would have passed, there wouldn't have been the possibility for any peace. Because already the package would have unraveled. And then what? Each person goes about their business. They forgot, Yom Kippur is already like behind us, and get on with our regular business again. Unfortunately, that's the way humans are. But in other words, he's trying to stress the best day was the day right after Yom Kippur. So nobody would be against the peace that was being created with words of argumentation or involvement of money. Of course, whenever it comes to money, you can always tell, people go crazy. And so there's an expression in Hebrew, Yon, I'm sure you know it. How do you really know a person? Through the kos kis kas. Kos, I guess we just passed Purim. Kos means a cup. When they drink, the secrets come out. How they really are, how they really act. So through the kos, you can find out what the real essence of the person. Kis, that's their pocket. How they spend their money. You see what they spend their money on, then you know the person. They spend it for mitzvahs and to serve Hashem, and as opposed to whatever else people spend their money on. And kas, what they get angry about. So in halacha, you're really not allowed to get angry, but you're allowed to fake being angry at certain times. But the point is, if they only get angry for the right things, for Hashem, and it's short-lived, and it's not carried away. So in certain cases, it actually may be permissible, but in most cases, it's not. So you can tell somebody, kos, kis, kas. They're not exactly the same. It's the kaf and the samich are the same, but there's different vowelization. So he says, ki ein l'shalom shel Yom Kippurim esek b'zeh, since nobody's dealing with money on Yom Kippur. Who deals with money on Yom Kippur? Therefore, Moses sat the next day. He actually says even on that day to deal with these issues. I'm not sure what he means by that, but he basically says, Kadesh mikol tzad yeh shalom b'neihem. The ultimate goal was to create the peace. Az yuroyin l'dur b'medur echad, and only then they're able to actually dwell together in one, dwelling place. And that was the whole goal, because that's what the Mishkan represents. And remember, we talk about every human being has a portion of God. Remember, God you cannot divide. He's indivisible. There's no way to divide it. Yet we discussed the idea that each one of us has a portion of him, but we all have an equal portion. And we all have it's like basically God himself. So we spoke about God wanted this Mishkan so he can dwell in you, right? We said he should dwell in them. I know last week, a couple weeks ago, we said meaning in all three compartments. But in every one of us, God would dwell. And if God's dwelling in every one of us, and we made this house for him, that really means we made it for ourselves. The Mishkan is for us. Hainu HaMishkan HaMeshutaf L'Kulam. We're all partners again in the Mishkan also. And then after we were made unified through the Mishkan, I'll just read in Hebrew. VaYakel shenasu la'achadim ayidei HaMishkan HaMitzarfam, that we shared, right? We became unified through this Mishkan that we shared. We actually find later in the Torah that Moses actually does gather us together. So the question is, if all those other gatherings were also on the day after Yom Kippur. So the answer is no, but I'll tell you what he does say. And the idea is like this. Whenever you have like a first time of anything, it creates like an echo. It creates a pattern. It creates a root, a shorish. So the fact that on that first time, after the day after Yom Kippur, we were gathered together. So every other time we're gathered together, there should be a holiness and an elevated process. I heard Rabbi Gladstein said, and it's mentioned through Chazal, that even when we, the Jews, get together and do idol worship, if we're unified, we're not held in guilt on anywhere near the same level that if we were not unified. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, but there's something unique about being unified that God wants. Remember, God himself is one, and there's something about the whole unification of the Jewish people and being one that transcends everything. See, even God forbid when we get together for the wrong thing, the fact that we're unified overpowers everything else, and we're not held accountable as in normal situations. You have to go? Have a good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos, guys.
Most of them are on mute.
They're on mute?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
I got them. Yeah, we got them.
Yeah, they'll turn down.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Enjoy the weather there.
Where's there? Washington State?
It's not as nice as there.
Yeah, it's about 40 degrees over here.
Yeah, I know.
No, 40 degrees.
It's not here.
Fahrenheit or centigrade?
It's cold.
Wet snow.
So this last part of this paragraph explains, if you look back at our verses, we mentioned in 35, chapter 35, verse 1, that Moses assembled the entire assembly of Israel. He said to them, these are the things. We're going to get into this shortly, because it says things in plural, that Hashem commanded to do them. Then it mentions two verses about Shabbat. 6 days work may be done, but the 7th day shall be holy for you. A day of complete rest for Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death. So you got to remember that if there's something forbidden to do on Shabbat, in desecrating Shabbat, it's the death penalty. So God better make it clear and sure to us that we know what it is that we would be doing. All it says is work in English, but in Hebrew it says, Sheishes Yamim Ta'aseh Malacha, right? Malacha. We have to find out what malacha is. Kol ha'oseh bo malacha yumat. Anybody who does malacha will die. So it's not work. Trust me. It's not work. It's malacha. And the next verse says, you shall not kindle fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbat. So right here, the Kliyakar points out, in the name of the Akedah, it's a little, not a joke, but in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, it says, don't kindle fire. That fire should not go out. What's fire? Matlokas, divisions. Divisions, arguments amongst people. This should not happen on Shabbat. That what happens during Shabbat? People aren't working, right? They stay home from work. So they're bored. And there's more concern that when people are not doing anything, that they're likely to fight, right? When the kids are home from school, what happens? Fights break out, right? You know what I mean? So when people are not doing, they're not creative, they're not constructing things, they're just doing nothing, it's more likely that fights would develop. So that's why this morning, after we're told not to work, don't begin to get in arguments. And that's another reason why this gathering was done, so that we could be told together as a unity, don't break up into small groups and by creating arguments amongst each other. Okay, so that's the first part. Okay, what did you guys think so far? Interesting? Interesting. Life-changing? I hope so.
Well, Rabbi Aaron, will you please explain melacha, because it's not exactly work.
Yeah. So we're going to get into it a little bit, but I'll give you a little bit of an idea. The word melacha is used for the construction of the temple, of this Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And God says, and we're going to see it in detail now, so you're supposed to do melacha for 6 days, meaning you're supposed to do what is needed to construct this Mishkan. And then come Shabbos, you stop. God does not want you to do the melacha on Shabbat. It says it right here. So what we know is the creative acts of work that went into the construction of the tabernacle. That is melacha. In other words, to carry my couch up my steps and down my steps, or move tables around in my kitchen, is not melacha. It might be work, but that's not what's forbidden. What's forbidden is melacha. It's only those 39 creative acts. Now, there's only a few that are mentioned in the Torah. Do not kindle a fire. That's one of the 39 acts. But we're going to see another one very shortly. Most people say they didn't see it. But after we get through, you'll see not only it, but you'll understand why there's another 38. Okay? So, I'm glad you asked. So right away, he says, the Clear Car says, these are the things which Hashem commanded to do them. It says, Eila hadavarim, right? That's what it says. These are the things. Now look down to verse 4. It says, V'yomer Moshe el kol adas b'nei Yisrael leimor, right? Moses said to the whole congregation of Israel, saying, Zeh hadavar, this is the thing. Now, I know the word davar can mean thing or words. Okay, these are the things, or this is the word. Look at the words again. Eila hadvarim daled bet resh, or zeh hadavar daled bet resh. It's the same word. One is singular, one is plural. So when you look above and it says Moses gathered everyone, right, the whole kehillah, and it says to tell over these things that God commanded to do them, it's only Shabbat. That's all it says is Shabbat. And then when it talks about the Mishkan, it's zeh hadavar. So maybe it's not. What I'm trying to suggest is maybe when it says these are the things, we do see two verses that talk about Shabbat. Maybe there are two things here, because it says Eila Hadavarim by Shabbat, and then it says Zeh Hadavar by the Mishkan. If it already says Zeh Hadavar, it can't be included in the Dvarim. Dvarim is two things, and Dvar is one. So now let's go and see what the Clear Car says. He right away points out the word Dvarim infers two things, but it sounds like he's only telling them about one thing called Shabbat. And then there's no way that Devarim is going on the Mishkan, because when it says the Mishkan, it says Zeh Devar. It already says this is the thing. So he wants to know, what does it mean in the first verse, these are the things? That's the first question. The second question he asked, now this requires a little bit of dik-duk, Hebrew grammar. I'm putting my fingers out like this because there's a vowelization with two dots. It's called a tseireh. So the word Sheshes Yamim Te'aseh Melacha. It says 6 days. How does he translate here? Work may be done. 6 days, work may be done. What does that mean? What do you mean, may be done? Go back to chapter in Exodus 20, verse 9, in the 10 Commandments. It says 6 days, ta'avod, not te'avod, ta'avod. 6 days you must work, and that's real work. That's called labor. V'asita kol melachtecha, and during those 6 days of labor, of work, you do your malacha. But the difference here I want to show you is the word under the tuf. You have ta'avod with a patach, and you have te'aseh in our verse, which has a tseireh. And what's going to be the difference between the tseireh and the patach? This is the vowelization at the bottom. So he knows grammar much more than you and I, unless Meir jumps in. And he says right away that it should have said ta'aseh, not te'aseh, ta'aseh. But what does te'aseh imply? It implies that the work is done on its own, meaning me'atzma mashma. The work may be done. The work itself can happen. Okay, that's the first thing. He just wants to point out that there is a significance to the tseireh versus the patach. One would be like a command form, you shall work, like you must work, as opposed to the work may be done on its own. And this pasuk, he claims, is totally superfluous because we already have the verse, as I mentioned, in Exodus 20, verse 9, 6 days you shall labor. So we already explained that over there, he says. So he wants to try to resolve these issues by saying, why does it say devarim, plural? Since the ikar mitzvah, the prime purpose of this mitzvah, that was commanded for what purpose? For the melechet hamishkan. The real thing that is going on here in Parshas VaYakel is about the construction of the Mishkan. There's no doubt about it. And you should involve yourself. When? 6 days of the week. During these 6 days, you do your construction. You involve yourself. But what happens on the 7th day? On the 7th day, do not involve yourself in the construction of the Mishkan. Everyone with me so far? There's a concept, the Mishkan, building the Mishkan, does not push off Shabbat. It says Shabbat, and then it says Mishkan. So the Mishkan overrides Shabbat, meaning you must stop your work to observe the Shabbat. Shabbat does not push it off. Now that's not true in every case. There are things that push off other mitzvahs, and it has to do with the order, where they are. So when it says, for example, on the 8th day a child is born, the 8th day you must circumcise him. So there's certain exceptions to this case, but a child is born healthily on Shabbat, the following Shabbat will have a bris milah because it falls on the 8th day, which means that pushes Shabbos off. The Mishkan does not push off Shabbat. So here you have two things. Remember we said, why does it say Devarim? Why does it say these things? Number one, to be commanded about the building of the Mishkan, and the other most important mitzvah here is not to be involved in the Mishkan on Shabbat. So there's Eilu Dvarim, there's two things being taught here in those two verses. Number one, to yes, do the Mishkan, and number two, on Shabbat, not to do the Mishkan. Okay? And then it says, Te'aseh melacha. That seireh under the taf implies on its own, right? So we don't understand what that means. But work may be done. Since the ikar mitzvah, the prime command here, is really what? To bring what? To bring the free will offerings. Also, this is called malacha. What is actually called malacha? Carrying from one domain to another. Now, what do I mean by domains? Because it gets a little confusing, I have to admit. There's a private domain. I'm right now in a private domain. It has walls and it has a roof. Private domain. Then there's a thing called a public domain, where 600,000 people, like we were in Egypt, we were in the desert. This encampment, where you had 600,000 people or more, is called a public domain. Now, anything in between is basically, we'll call it no man's land. It's basically a private domain, but not really. Nobody can really say it's a private domain, but it's not a public domain either. So the rabbis call it, for practical purposes, a public domain. That's why a Jew on Shabbat cannot walk out of his house carrying any items in his pocket, can't even carry his key to his house, can't carry his talit to shul, can't carry his prayer book, his leave in shul, except if there is what we call a rabbinic thing called an eruv, where it's basically closing the community with a virtual wall. Because we know that if you have a walled city, you can carry inside of the walled city. It's an enclosure. Anywhere there's an enclosure. And again, you don't have 600,000. You don't have a place where 600,000 people can congregate together. Now, let me just go back to that. That is a place where 600,000 people can congregate together. That is at least 16 amos wide, 16 cubits wide, and straight and narrow all the way down. Let's say like in Broadway, New York. That is a place where it's called a Rishus Harabim. It's a public thoroughfare. And therefore the people living on the east side of Manhattan, they can carry in their domain, in their few square blocks, because they made an eruv. But they can't cross Broadway to the other side carrying things. They have to leave them behind and cross Broadway without things in their pockets. But there's not that many places that have that problem. Jerusalem, almost every city that has a large population of Jews has this eruv. And the eruv basically takes care of what we call the Carmelists, that in between, that dead man's zone, that dead zone. It's not private, it's not public, so we're going to make it private so you don't get confused. Right? So everyone has a map, every Jewish community has a map on which lampposts, which poles this string goes around, and it creates a virtual chatzer, a virtual courtyard, where we all shared homes in a certain courtyard, and therefore we're able to live somewhat normal. On Shabbat, carrying babies, otherwise you couldn't go out of your house, you couldn't carry your baby, you couldn't even walk with a stroller. So no complaints. I'm just telling you that modern society has adopted to these things. And but hotza'ah, you're not allowed to walk out. If you didn't have an Arab, and there are places in the world, many Jews live where there are no Arabs, and they deal with it. They make how do they carry their key? They make their belt buckle a key. The actual weld into the belt buckle their key. And therefore anything you wear as a garment is not a problem. Many other ways to deal with other issues. You actually wear your towels to shul. Instead of carrying it in a bag, you just put it over your head and you're wearing it. And of course you can have your siddur in shul already. Anyway, how did we get to this? So this idea of carrying. So he wants to tell us, just like it says here, if you go to the verse in 36:6, you can find that number 9 on the source sheet. Moses commanded, then they announced in the camp, saying, let no man or woman do any more work. It's called work in Hebrew, malacha, for the offering, so the people stopped bringing. You understand? The work that he was referring to was the carrying, not to carry. Ish v'isha al ya'asu od malacha. Each man, they should no longer do malacha. V'yikah leha'am mehevi. And the people stopped bringing. But what's the 2 words I didn't read? Trumas HaKodesh. They stopped doing malacha as the holy gifts, or the offering of the holy, and they stopped bringing. So this idea that carrying is one of the 39 malachot, taking from one domain to another, is forbidden on Shabbat, and it's pretty clear right here, although many people, might disagree, but this is one of the places that's very clear. Habas hanadava mirushus merishus nikra malacha. Carrying these gifts from one domain to another is actually called malacha, hotza'ah. It's one of the 39 forbidden acts on Shabbat. Not only that, that particular malacha, what does it say? It says te'aseh with the tseireh. Now, it says not that you shall work, but that the work may be done. Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about free will offerings. Can you command a free will offering? No. The free will offering comes on its own. So now we understand why the tseireh is used. Te'aseh, the work may be done. What work? You couldn't say you must work in this form of carrying in a way of a command, because anything that is given from the aspect of a free will offering, you cannot command. But rather each person gives of his own and from himself. And that's why it says te'aseh malacha, that it comes on its own. And now Shabbos, on the day of Shabbat, which is Shabbos to Hashem, it's forbidden to bring these free will offerings even from one domain to another. Okay, guys? Woo! It's pretty heavy stuff, you ask me. But it changes your life. You know, if you see that violating Shabbat is a death penalty, you don't want to do that. So you move to a Jewish community, or you check your pockets before you leave the house. Okay? Check your pockets before you walk out of the house on Shabbat. If you have a fenced-in yard, you can leave your key outside underneath the flower pot or the rock, So, okay. The last thing he says here is there's a medrash. Now, I don't know if you heard of this, that the actual Mishkan, the tabernacle, part of it built itself, meaning we donated everything and we constructed the parts, but it itself kind of constructed itself. Similar to the menorah. Moses threw the gold into the fire and the menorah came out made. So I'll just read how he quotes the Medrash. Lefi Midrash Rabbi Zal, the rabbis say that the Mishkan na'asu ktsato me'olav. It was partially constructed on its own, just like the menorah was constructed on its own. Because the Hakamat Mishkan, the erecting of the Mishkan, was on its own. Similarly, the construction was on its own. Look at chapter 40, verse 17. That's Exodus chapter 40, verse 17. It says, "And it came to pass in the first month in the second year, in the first day of the month, that the Mishkan was set up." Hukam Mishkan. The Mishkan was set up. And look, I don't have the next verse, but the next verse basically says, Moses then set up the Mishkan. So that's a little bit out of order. The Mishkan was set up, and then the next verse says that Moses erected the Mishkan. Something is out of whack here. So we learn from here that the Mishkan partially assembled itself. So this is another reason for the tseireh, just like the donations came as a free will offering and they came on their own, they didn't have to be commanded or worked. So too, the Mishkan, which these donations went towards, also there was an aspect of it being set up on its own, te'aseh, as if it happened on its own, which that's what he says here in the Medrash. That's why it says te'aseh malacha, that the malacha may be done on its own, it infers. Okay, how we doing? How we doing? Good? What time is it? Okay, so I'll ask you if there's, we have a lot more we can do, but I'd rather open it up to questions, and I can turn the camera off, and we can ask questions. So, hold on.